There are a lot of different ways that the first round of the NFL draft could shake out, especially for the New Orleans Saints, who select twice at 16 and 19. So we'll take a look at three different scenarios from best to worst case about how the New Orleans Saints draft day could go on Thursday. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into this Mock Draft Monday episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we are free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter. You can find me over at USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And on today's episode, which is brought to you by our friends over at Bet Online, they've got more odds, lines, and props for you than ever before. So go check them out, Bet Online, where the game starts. We're going to be breaking down the best sort of a mid scenario and worst case scenarios for the New Orleans Saints. And of course, we're going to start off with the best case scenario, right? The best case scenario for the New Orleans Saints is that they have their choice of at least two of the top four tackles and two of the top four wide receivers by the time they get to pick 16. That part is key. Not that they're going to be able to choose between any pairing of tackles and tight ends or tackles and wide receivers at both 16 and 19, but just simply having that opportunity to be able to select between two top four tackles or wide receivers at 16. It gives the New Orleans Saints the opportunity to be able to walk away with two of those four players. Here's how it all works, right? If the New Orleans Saints are selecting at 16, right ahead of the Los Angeles Chargers at 17, and there are two top tackles on the board, very likely what will happen is that tackle could go back-to-back at 16 and 17 for the Saints and the Chargers. So let's say that Charles Cross and Trevor Penning are both available. The New Orleans Saints select Trevor Penning, and then Charles Cross goes at 17 to the Los Angeles Chargers, or the Saints select Charles Cross, and then at 17, the Chargers go with Trevor Penning. The reason why that is important because that means that the pair of wide receivers that was also there at 16 will remain for 18 and 19. So that would put the Saints in a situation to where even if the Philadelphia Eagles, who could potentially go wide receiver at either 15 or 18, do so, but then still leave a wide receiver available, one of those top four wide receivers, at 19 for the New Orleans Saints. So who are the top four tackles in this year's draft? If we revisit the top 25 players that we did from a couple of weeks ago, or from a week ago, we've got Charles Cross, Evan Neal, Ike Ekwonu, as well as Trevor Penning as the top four tackles. For the top four receivers, we've got Drake London, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, and Jameson Williams. Now, you can put those in any order that you like in terms of who your 1 through 4 is, but those are really your top four wide receivers and your top four offensive tackles. You may want to make the argument that Drake London is not a top four wide receiver based upon how you feel that he hasn't run yet. You don't really see the athleticism there, only produced on one side of the field in college. But if you can sort of project what it is that you did see him do well to the next level, which remember is a lot of scouting, right? Trying to project the good things about a team or a player and a player's fit, all of that, then I think that you might keep Drake London up there. If you don't like Drake London up there, then you're adding maybe Treylon Burks there. Maybe you're high on Jahan Dotson, whomever, right? But regardless, having any pair of those four players at each position available for pick 16 is the best case scenario for the New Orleans Saints on Thursday in round one. Now, that's assuming that their targets are offensive tackle and wide receiver, which I still believe they are, but the Saints could go any number of ways just based upon who's left on the board in any of those places. So now, when you look at this, what is the pairing out of those four players at each position that you'd really like to walk away with? Because that might influence whether you go wide receiver at 16 or if you go tackle at 16 and then try to pick up the other guy at 19. Because let's say that the Saints really, really want one of the wide receivers that's available. Let's say that at 16, you've got Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson still available. And they really, really like Chris Olave, let's say. and they like, let's say they like Chris Olave more than they like Charles Cross, right? So they would be willing to sacrifice getting Charles Cross at 16 to draft Chris Olave and then walk away at 19 with Trevor Penning, for instance, with Garrett Wilson going to the Philadelphia Eagles at 18, let's say, and then at 17, Charles Cross going to the Chargers. So what's your favorite pairing there? Would you rather see them go Chris Olave and Trevor Penning, or would you rather see them go potentially Charles Cross and Garrett Wilson? I'm not going to lie, as much as I like Chris Olave, I kind of like the idea of I like the sound of Charles Cross and Garrett Wilson a little bit more. I'm not gonna lie, right? Because I really, really like Charles Cross. I think is why he's my number one player, number one tackle, all that. While Chris Olave is my number one wide receiver, but wide receiver is so much more closely packed together than tackles are in this draft. Like the drop off between, let's say, Charles Cross and Trevor Penning is probably steeper than the drop off from Chris Olave to Treylon Burks, or the drop off from Chris Olave to Jameson Williams if you count in the injury, right? Injury recovery time, all of that as a part of the evaluation process. So it just kind of depends, right? Would you rather have Penning and Wilson, Cross and Olave, Cross and Williams versus, let's say, Penning and Olave, all of that. So whichever of those pairings are will influence where you went first. But regardless, having a pair of tackles, top 4 tackles, and a pair of top 4 receivers available at 16 sets the Saints up for their best case scenario if they go offensive tackle and wide receiver in the first round. Now, one of those positions could be gone, and it could force them to go and look at another position, right? So that's what we'll talk about next. Kind of the mid-level, not the perfect scenario, but not the worst case scenario either, how the New Orleans Saints would go off of that. And we have a 7-round mock draft for you based off of that scenario as well. So we'll get to all of that as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. But first, I get to tell you about our friends over at Athletic Greens. Their AG1 powder has been an absolute game changer for me here recently, and even really over the course of the last year. I've been using this since the first time Athletic Greens was here as a supporter of the show, and I just never stopped because it helps me feel a lot better. Gut health, which is kind of this weird new science that we're all trying to figure out and understand. It helps with that. It's helped me sleep better. It's helped me sleep more efficiently too. Like I feel like I actually get a full night's sleep because I'm not dealing with any type of like stomach pain or digestive issues and stuff like that. So I absolutely love this stuff. It's 1 scoop of the powder, basically a cup of water, first thing in the morning before you have your morning cup of coffee, and then everything else is just so much easier all throughout the day. So to make it easy, so you can give it a try, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of the immune supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NFL network. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/NFL network to take ownership of your own health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, we have so much NFL draft coverage. The final episode of the Ultimate Mock Draft has released both on the Ultimate Mock Draft 2022 feed as well as on the Locked On NFL podcast feed. So make sure you go and check those out. It's all there for you. 6 episodes. You can go back to the beginning of round 1, listen all the way through. You can get pick 16 and 19, my 2 selections, which I was very happy with there as well. You can also go and check out and make sure you're subscribed to the Locked On NFL YouTube page for all 3 days of our live NFL draft coverage, which begins Thursday with round 1 around 7 p.m. Eastern time. And speaking of round 1, we talked about the best case scenario for the New Orleans Saints in round 1, any pair of the top 4 offensive tackles and wide receivers being available at 16. But sort of the next place that kind of makes you have to veer off the plan a little bit is if all of the top 4 tackles, for instance, are unavailable. It doesn't really put you in an end of the world situation for the New Orleans Saints, but it does complicate things a little bit and probably veers you away from going offensive tackle, which the Saints may consider a pretty big need. Again, they have James Hurst where they can sort of band-aid the situation for 2022, but if you're looking for a tackle of the future, then that kind of puts you in a little bit of a different situation. So how would the Saints navigate this? Because again, it's not an end of the world situation, but it does complicate things a little bit. So in this situation in which I did this 7-round mock draft, which we'll go over here in just a sec, a few of the wide receivers still made it. Chris Olave, Treylon Burks, Garrett Wilson were all on the board, but all 4 top tackles were gone. And just as a reminder, those guys, Ike Ekwonu, Charles Cross, Evan Neal, and then Trevor Penning. So all of them went very early in this one. So for me, that meant that I kind of had to figure out, okay, where do I want to go next, right? I know I'm going to go wide receiver here because I have 3 of my top 4 wide receivers or 3 of my top 5 wide receivers that I can pick from. So I'm good. But where do I go after that? So at 16, I went with Chris Olave. Nice, easy, simple, right? You know he's going to fit in. You know he has a role. You know that he's going to be a good complement to Michael Thomas. He has the OSU, the Ohio State University connection, all of that stuff. So that's all good news, right? So we got Chris Olave at 16, cool. But then at 19, I don't have a tackle to go to. I don't really have a quarterback that I want. I'm still not a Kenny Pickett believer. He was on the board, but again, I'm not a fan. Malik Willis was already gone. The tackles are off the board. I've taken my wide receiver. Do I double up at wide receiver, right? Like, do I put Chris Olave and Treylon Burks in the same situation? Or do I go to the defensive side and try to shore up the defense a little bit more, right? The New Orleans Saints have finished with a top 5 scoring defense for the past 2 seasons. So let me add to a strength. Let me keep a strength, but also fix a spot where, hey, I can get one of the top 2 defensive tackles in this situation and feel really, really good about my defensive line. So that's what I did. So I went with Devonte Wyatt, the interior defensive lineman from Georgia. I didn't go with Jordan Davis because he was already off the board. I could have if he was there, but if I was going to make the selection between these two, then I'd probably lean toward Jordan Davis, but I personally like Devonte Wyatt a bit better. I think he's a little bit more of a penetrating 3-tech guy as opposed to an athletic nose tackle, which is basically what Jordan Davis is going to be at the next level. Which I don't mind that, but I'm not really looking to invest a first-round pick in a nose tackle. If I'm going to invest a first-round pick in a defensive tackle, then I want to get a player that has the ability to be an impact 3 downs, right? And so no matter what, the New Orleans Saints are going to rotate and everything, and I think Devonte Wyatt would fit well into that alongside David Onyemata. So that would shore up that area. So that's what I ended up having to do at 19. I could have gone safety. I could have gone quarterback, but I wasn't about to do that. And then obviously, maybe I could have surprised and gone Zion Johnson, the offensive lineman, interior offensive lineman from Boston College. But I decided that I wanted to just keep a strength. So I went with Devonte Wyatt. And I was paid, I was paid back for that. At pick 49, Jaquan Brisker, safety from Penn State, was available on the board. So that allowed me, even without those offensive tackles at the top of the draft, to still be able to get 3 players that are going to see the field this season. Chris Olave, Devonte Wyatt, Jaquan Brisker, with those top 50 selections. Then when we got to pick 98, didn't really have a lot of options here. Could have maybe gone running back, but I really like Greg Dulcich. And again, this tight end class isn't extremely good. It's not very top heavy, but it's got depth. And so Greg Dulcich is my tight end 1. So being able to get him in the 3rd round at 98 was hard to pass up. So you get another pass catcher in this situation. You kind of double up on pass catcher with Chris Olave. Somebody that's also going to see the field immediately, but probably isn't going to have a year 1 impact, as most rookie tight ends don't have year 1 impacts. And so, you get them and then you have somebody that you can fold in maybe after Nick Vannett leaves. At 120 in the 4th round, I was able to address offensive tackle, and I felt really good about it because it was Rasheed Walker, the offensive tackle out of Penn State, who has the athleticism, who has the strength, he has the mean streak, all of those things, and he played in a Big Ten offensive line, which we know the New Orleans Saints really, really like. So I was able to get Rasheed Walker there. So even though I couldn't get one of the top 4 offensive tackles, I don't feel like my drop-off was that much in terms of what I lost in maybe having to go Bernard Raymond, for instance, at 19, who may or may not pan out at already 24 years old, which is a little bit older than where the Saints usually invest in the draft. They're usually right around the 22-year-old area. And instead, I can go with a little bit of a younger prospect in Rasheed Walker, who's played the position for a longer time. Remember, Raymond's only played the position for 2 years. And then now you get, somebody that has the athleticism and then can come in and either challenge James Hurst for that starting left tackle spot or sit for a year. Either one's fine. At this point, I don't mind bringing in somebody that needs time to develop, not in the 4th round. And then but the last 2 picks here, 161, I was able to go with Cade Mays, the interior offensive lineman out of Tennessee. And then at 194, I went with Bo Melton, another wide receiver here. So did double up at wide receiver, tripled up at pass catcher, so that I could get him in from Rutgers. And so basically here is, how do you maximize day 3 selections? You find guys that can play multiple roles, Cade Mays, and you find athletes that might be able to find a role on special teams, Bo Melton. Now, Bo Melton could also become a gadget offense wide receiver type of player that you use in a bunch of different ways. Let's say that maybe Taysom Hill gets injured or something like that, or Taysom Hill's not ready to begin the season as he's still working back from the Liz Frank injury, and you want somebody that's not Alvin Kamara that can play a bunch of roles on offense. Bo Melton could be that guy. He could earn that role. Or maybe you put Kawan Baker there and you have Bo Melton on the practice squad, and you finally get Kawan Baker involved. after drafting him in the 7th round last year. So that's really what you're looking for in the 7th round or in the 3rd day. And so that's what I was able to do. And Cade Mays can play 4 out of 5, positions on the offensive line. He's smart. He comes from an SEC school. He comes from Tennessee, where the Saints really like to invest in the trenches out of Tennessee. They like those players, all of that, and a little bit of familiarity there with Cody Burns as well, I'm sure, since they were both on the offensive side. So that was the way that I was able to do that. So I just went in day 3 for those guys that could play multiple roles and that might be able to be like the athletes that are enough to find a role on special teams right away. So just to recap, 16 wide receiver Chris Olave, 19 interior defensive lineman Devonte Wyatt, safety Jaquan Brisker at 49, tight end Greg Dulcich out of UCLA at 98, Rasheed Walker, offensive tackle out of Penn State at 120, and then Cade Mays, interior offensive line, Bo Melton, wide receiver at 161 and 194. The only thing I wish I could have done here was maybe go running back, but again, the draft just really didn't fall that way in this situation. But I was still pretty happy with it. But again, like this is a whole situation, right? This is a whole different thing now because we've looked now at best case scenario. We've looked at sort of like the mid-level scenario. And then now we're going to take a look at worst case scenario, because worst case scenario is that those top 4 offensive line, those top 4 offensive tackles, and those top 4 wide receivers are off the board, or maybe one remains. What do you do then at 16 and 19? We'll break that down, and we're going to take a look at a scenario that was actually played out by another analyst as we go through all of that. So that's what we'll take a look at next as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. But first, we have to tell you about our friends over at Built Bar, the best tasting protein bars on the market, the protein bars that taste like candy bars. Listen to some of these flavors, right? Coconut almond. If you're coconut people, it's kind of like the Almond Joy and Mounds of the situation here, because every one of these is also covered in 100% chocolate. There's also mint chocolate, mint brownie, There's also peanut butter brownie, and there's cherry barcia, cookies and cream, so many different flavors that you could try, as well as the Built Puffs as well, and a bunch of other limited time flavors that are rolling in every single month. So make sure you go and check them out over at built.com so you can stay up to date with all of the new flavors and all the limited edition flavors that hit the site as well. We're talking 4 or 5 grams of sugar, 4 or 5 grams of net carbs, 17 grams of protein, getting you everything you need to get through your day or get your day started, whatever it is that you're looking for. Go to built.com to try them for yourself. Use the promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED15, so you can get 15% off of your next order. That is 15% off your next order with the promo code LOCKED15 at built.com. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with our worst case scenario for the New Orleans Saints in this year's NFL draft, at least in the first round, right? Look, there's a whole bunch of opportunities here for things to go really well for the New Orleans Saints, but we should acknowledge that things might not go great for them in terms of the way that the board could fall. Sometimes things are just simply out of their hands. And so I want to talk a little bit about a mock draft that was recently put out by Peter King over at PFT. And it's kind of worst case scenario for the New Orleans Saints. And it's just interesting to see how you could look to navigate that if you went that route. So remember, we talked about best case scenario being any pair of the top 4 tackles, top 4 wide receivers being available. So let's focus on those positions, roll through the first 15 selections, and I'll tell you where each tackle and wide receiver went, who they are, when they came off the board. All right, so at pick 3, this starts early. The Houston Texans taking Ike Ekwonu, the offensive tackle from North Carolina State. So that's your first tackle off the board at pick 3. Not long after that, pick 5, second tackle comes off the board. Charles Cross of Mississippi State goes to the New York Giants. Pick 6, right after that, Carolina Panthers take Evan Neal, offensive tackle out of Alabama. Then, right at pick 8, so just a couple picks later, the Atlanta Falcons take the first wide receiver off the board in Drake London, wide receiver out of USC. Right after that, pick 9, which originally belonged to the Seattle Seahawks, Peter King has the Houston Texans trading in to take Garrett Wilson, wide receiver out of Ohio State. So now that's your second wide receiver off the board. Very quickly, though, your third receiver goes off the board. This time, Jameson Williams to the New York Jets. Pick 11, your fourth receiver already comes off the board. Chris Olave, Washington Commanders. So then you roll through, you got a couple of little selections here, and then, pick 14. Baltimore Ravens select Trevor Penning, offensive tackle out of Northern Iowa. So, just to recap, all 4 top wide receivers and all 4 top tackles off the board by the 14th selection. And just to add a little bit of injury to insult as well, The Philadelphia Eagles in this mock at pick 15 take Jordan Davis, the interior defensive lineman out of Georgia. So at pick 16, the New Orleans Saints still go wide receiver. They take Treylon Burks, wide receiver out of Arkansas. And then off goes Trent McDuffie to the Chargers. Off goes Jahan Dotson to the Green Bay Packers, who trade ahead of the New Orleans Saints to select him. And so the Saints at pick 19 go Devontae Wyatt. So Peter King looked at this very similarly to the way that I looked at our kind of like mid-level situation, to where all the tackles are off the board. In his scenario here, where all 4 top tackles are off the board and all 4 top wide receivers are off the board, still went wide receiver, took Treylon Burks, who I think is an ex-receiver by build, 6'3", 225 pounds, but he's operated a little bit more as a big slot. And I know a lot of people will say, oh, well, Michael Thomas operates out of the slot, but it's not entirely true. They use him in the slot every now and then, but it's like 20-something% of the time. We're not talking about 40, 50% of snaps operating out of the slot. Now, Treylon Burks took 70% of his snaps operating out of the slot in college. So you can use him as a big slot if you'd like, but you can also use him on the opposite side of the field from Michael Thomas, because he's a bit of a field stretcher, right? He has the speed. I know his 40 time doesn't necessarily tell you that, but he has the speed, as he has left SEC defender after SEC defender in his dust during his time at Arkansas. And of course, you also have a guy there that can be creative and make some things happen with the ball in his hand after the catch, which you really, really need opposite Michael Thomas as well. So the pairing of Michael Thomas and Treylon Burks is still very good. Peter King also following that same idea of make a strength, keep a strength, and go with the focus on the defense. And in this scenario, he took Devontae Wyatt, the interior defensive lineman from Georgia, to help shore up the defensive line some more. So you get what you need in terms of bolstering that offense. And then you help to support your strength, which is your defense. I like that path for the Saints, even if it comes down to worst case scenario. As you can see here, you can still walk away with 2 impact players that would get immediate, that would start week 1, that would be on the field week 1 and make an actual difference for you. So even in the worst case scenario for the New Orleans Saints, it all still worked out in that way. And I will mention too, that in this scenario that Peter King also drew up, Kenny Pickett goes at 20. So he was on the board at 16 and 19. But he doesn't have the Saints walking away with Kenny Pickett. He has them focusing at wide receiver and then going interior defensive line over quarterback. So I wasn't alone in that either. So really, really interesting stuff, and something to keep an eye out on, as a lot of teams are looking to move back. Not a lot of teams looking to move up, according to some recent reports. So we'll see how that impacts the Saints too. Could they potentially be in a situation like that, get a wide receiver at 16 and trade back out of 19? It could happen. It could be one of those situations where, they traded up in the hopes that 2 players would land there, one at 16 and one at 19. That didn't happen. So now they changed course and then could end up adding some potential future picks, some more picks in this year's draft, whatever. We haven't seen them trade back since 2007, though, so I won't hold my breath on it. Now, will the Saints select at 16 and 19? That's going to be an interesting portion of all of this to watch too. Will they trade up? Will they move around? All of that. We're going to break into that a little bit more in tomorrow's episode. We'll have another mock draft. I promise you, a 7-round mock draft every single day leading up to the first round of the NFL draft, including also just a standard first-round mock draft on that day. So tomorrow we're going to take a look at trading up, right? I want to trade up at 16, see what happens. Trade up at 19, see what happens. I'm not really interested in trading 16 and 19, but I guess we can look at it. I just hope that the New Orleans Saints don't do that. I'll tell you why in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Saints. Appreciate you as always. Make us your first listen or watch of the day every day here on the show. For your second listen, make sure you go and check out the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast, Mock Draft Monday, going up here in just a little bit. Make sure you go and check them out over wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. As always, I appreciate you so much for making me a part of your day. And for everything else you need around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.